Thank you. All right, so thank you so much for coming to see the talk today entitled Panopticoin, Bitcoin, Anonymity, and Freedom. My name is Kristov Atlas. I'm the author of the recently published Anonymous Bitcoin book. I'm a security consultant and researcher for a number of years. And if you want to get in contact with me, you can go to anonymousbitcoinbook.com or @anonymouscoin on Twitter. Today I'm going to be talking about what's wrong with Bitcoin right now in terms of financial privacy, why we should care about these privacy issues, and what we can do to fix all of them. So first, about the title of the talk. It's a reference to this idea called the Panopticon. And the Panopticon was this concept that this English social theorist came up in the 18th century. And essentially what it was a design for a prison. So this prison would be a dome-shaped building. In the very middle of the building, you would have a guard tower and just a couple guards there. They'd be able to look all around themselves. And lining the interior of the dome, you would have the actual prison cells where the prisoners are. Now, even though there are many more prisoners than there are guards, the prisoners don't know when they're being watched. So they have to act as if they're being watched at all times, when in case this is not the fact. So I think that the Panopticon is a very interesting metaphor for surveillance in the 21st century, and it's relevant to Bitcoin right now for reasons that I'll get into in a moment. So to help you understand some of these privacy issues, I'd like to walk you through a sample Bitcoin interaction involving two parties. So we're going to have two people, Alice and Bruce. If you're confused by the picture on the right, it's actually a cryptographer and privacy writer, Bruce Schneier, photoshopped onto the body of Chuck Norris, right? And so we're going to have Alice send Bruce a 9 millibit tip. 9 millibits is 9 1,000ths of a Bitcoin, so when Bitcoin's at around $1,000, it's about $9 total. So let's talk about what the transaction is going to look like. Alice says to Bruce, hey, I read your article about the NSA surveillance for The Guardian. Can I send you a tip? It was really good. And Bruce is like, hey, sure, great. Here's my Bitcoin address. And so Alice sends the tip through the Bitcoin network. And what we're going to see on the blockchain, which is the public ledger of all of the transactions on the Bitcoin network, Alice sends to Bruce 9 millibits. All these transactions are time stamped. So let's just say that it takes place on January 16th at 5 p.m. And we're not actually going to see Alice and Bruce's names on the blockchain. What we have on the blockchain instead are these pseudonyms that people are using, which are Bitcoin addresses. They look like random strings of letters and numbers. And so we don't, at first glance, we don't know who these people are necessarily. They have pseudonyms that they can use, which is why people often say that Bitcoin is pseudonymous. Now, let's get into the privacy issues. So once Bruce and Alice do this transaction, they have a privacy issue with each other because they know about each other's Bitcoin addresses. And now they can start tracking either any past transactions associated with these addresses or even future ones. So they have kind of a peer-to-peer privacy issue with each other. So let's look at this from Bruce's perspective, right? So he gets the 9 millibit tip. And let's say the next day he goes to Walmart and he decides he's going to buy one 9 millimeter bullet for 1.08 millibits. And Alice is being a bit of a snoop, so she's like, I wonder what he's going to spend that money on. I really want to find out. So she's looking at his Bitcoin address on blockchain.info or whatever. And she sees, okay, Bruce sent someone 97 cents worth of Bitcoin at 4 p.m. the following day after I sent him the tip. She knows it's 97 cents because she can look at the exchange rate of Bitcoin and the dollar at that particular time relating to the timestamp. Now, this person that Bruce sent the money to is pseudonymous to Alice, but I want to throw out a couple possible scenarios here. What if Walmart is reusing Bitcoin addresses between customers and Alice knows who this address belongs to? And what if Walmart only has, a couple or one item that you can buy from Walmart for Bitcoin that costs exactly 97 cents? Now Bruce has a much more significant privacy issue with Alice because Alice sees, okay, Bruce bought one 9 millimeter bullet from Walmart on this exact date and time. And that's probably far more information than Bruce would like to share with Alice just because she sent him a tip. So that's sort of a peer-to-peer privacy issue that we have with Bitcoin. So let's go a little bit broader now. So In addition to having a privacy issue with people that you're interacting with in Bitcoin, someone that's just passively looking at the blockchain can also mine it for data. So let's go back to Alice's tip, and I'd just like to go through a couple hypothetical scenarios there. So let's say that the tip, before she sends it, Alice actually has 3 millibits in 3 different Bitcoin addresses. And so in order to form the 9 millibits that she's sending to Bruce, her Bitcoin client is going to have to pool those funds together from the 3 addresses. And the way that's going to look like on the blockchain is we're going to have an input of 3 sending addresses, output to Bruce's address. Someone looking at the blockchain, what they're going to infer from this is that the same person owns all 3 of those Bitcoin addresses that were sending Bitcoins. Let's look at another scenario. Let's say instead of having it in 3 different Bitcoin addresses, Alice has it in just 1 Bitcoin address, but she starts off with 20 millibits. The way that's going to look like on the blockchain is she's actually going to send all 20 millibits. 9 of them will go to Bruce, and then the 11 will come back to Alice as change. And depending on how her Bitcoin software works, it might go back to the same address that she sent it from, or it might go to a new address that we would colloquially call a change address. So people that are passively observing the blockchain, looking for information, I like to refer to these people as investigators. What they can sort of do with this information is, rather than all of the Bitcoin addresses being an individual pseudonym, they're starting to group them together and identify that a single person or entity or corporation or whatever owns a group of Bitcoin addresses. And if they can take this information from the blockchain and combine that with other sources of information, then they could potentially link personal identities with a group of Bitcoin addresses. And it kind of blows up this whole pseudonymous scheme. And that could happen to Alice if she tweets out one of her Bitcoin addresses, or if the investigator looking at the blockchain works for the Bitcoin exchange that she's doing business with, or if someone hacks that Bitcoin exchange and gets their logs. So the first reason why we should care about these issues, there are 2 reasons. First one is pragmatic, just basic financial privacy. We're coming from the legacy banking system where we expect a certain kind of financial privacy with people that we're doing business with. If we get a paycheck in the mail, we don't assume that our boss is going to start looking at what we're buying from the grocery store and so forth, but that's kind of where Bitcoin is at right now. Some entities will want to fully disclose their finances. If you're a corporation or a charity, then the ability to fully disclose your finances with Bitcoin, that's a very interesting, useful feature. But for most of us, we don't want to do that. Some of the things that we purchase need to be temporarily secret. That could be a surprise gift for your friend. It could be an engagement ring, or it could be divorce papers. And some of the things that we want to buy need to be permanently secret. If you look at like a blogger in North Korea that's blogging about the regime there, and he's relying on tips through the internet to make his living, he needs to have a very high level of financial privacy. I think that this basic financial issue with Bitcoin has the potential to kind of blow up in the next couple years. And the way that I see that it happening is there's going to be some kind of website, something like whatmyexbuys.com, where some creep, he goes to the website, he enters his ex-girlfriend's Bitcoin address, and it starts giving him a list of people that she's been doing business with, stuff that she's been buying from companies potentially, and it could get kind of nasty. The last reason that's to do with basic financial privacy is around theft. When you fully disclose your finances, you invite theft. In the same way that you probably would not want to take your bank account balance or all the things that you have in your apartment that are really worth a lot of money, blow it up on a big sign and put it outside your house. You don't want to do this with Bitcoin, and yet we have something that's sort of like that with Bitcoin right now with this very open ledger. Now, that's the pragmatic reason why we should care about this stuff. Now, from the more ideological reasons. It has to do with government censorship of money. Fundamentally, governments cannot be trusted to fairly censor money. They don't have a good track record. So just a few things in this area. Governments steal from people. We look at the example of the 2 big-to-fail banks. We had bailouts in the US where the US is basically stealing from people that haven't been born yet, right? We have bail-ins in countries like Cyprus where they literally reach into people's savings accounts, take a handful out without their permission. Governments are also very hypocritical enforcing laws in this area. If you look at the two big-to-jail banks like HSBC, who was giving out a little slap on the wrist and a fine for laundering millions of dollars for violent drug cartels. That's not a courtesy that's been extended to people in the Bitcoin community, obviously. Laws also tend to be quite often nebulous and kind of arbitrary. There was a law professor a few years ago who said basically there's not a single person in the United States that's over the age of 18 years who could not be indicted for some federal crime. That's kind of scary. There were 40,000 new federal laws passed in 2013 alone, and the total number of federal laws is essentially uncountable. There's been a number of law organizations that have tried to count it, and they gave up because they couldn't do it. We also have a pretty significant amount of perjury by police officers in the courts, which really calls into question the meaning of truth and evidence in the court system. So in other words, I think that although most of us will absolutely never go to jail, it kind of could happen to any one of us. It's a risk that's posed to citizens all over the world. Governments also have a very bad history of abusing capital controls and surveillance of money. So let's look at a regime that I think everyone can pretty much agree was not very good, the Nazi regime. So in 1918, Germany passed what was called the Law Against Tax Evasion to make sure that everyone's paying their fair share, right? And then a few years later, in 1931, they passed the Reich Flight Tax, which is basically saying to the Jews, look, we can't stop you from fleeing the country for your lives, but if you do, we can make sure that we keep your money on your way out. Now imagine someone in 2014 saying to you, well, look, the Nazi law enforcement absolutely needed these tools to make sure that people were obeying the laws. That would be obviously a pretty ludicrous and evil statement. And so these kinds of reasons are why we need to avoid these kind of traps to do with privacy and surveillance. People say, well, I've got nothing to hide and so forth. But really, you do have some risk. And even if you don't, you're kind of throwing other innocent people under the bus when you say that. For a very good piece on that, read Daniel J. Solov's I've Got Nothing to Hide and Other Misunderstandings of Privacy. So censorship technologies can be used by both good and bad people. And we can't really stop the bad people from using the things that are available to the good ones. I think that the solution is to separate state and money, and I think that Bitcoin has the potential to make that happen. So how do we fix these issues with the blockchain? Fundamentally, it comes down to transaction anonymity. We have right now a state of opt-in privacy with Bitcoin. We have things like mixing services where you can put your Bitcoins through a mixer, you get them out, and they're sort of anonymized. But the problem with opt-in privacy, which we know from other areas of technology, is that you get very low participation. People simply will not participate in these systems. And everyone else is surveilled. And it creates a problem for anonymity, because anonymity is all about participation. Anonymity is how many people can I be mistaken for? And if we have low participation, it's not very many. It also makes fungibility eroding efforts like coin validation much easier. If you care about Bitcoin at all, you should be very, very concerned about things like coin validation. What we would much prefer to have is opt-out privacy, right? If you want to fully disclose your stuff, you can, but the default is that you're not disclosing them. The way that we can make that happen, we could make changes to the Bitcoin protocol. A lot of people have heard of the zero coin proposal. We can also do other things. There's disposable and derived addresses, extended public keys, and so forth. That's just some tech talk. Don't worry about that. We can also make changes to Bitcoin clients. Some things that have come up in that space recently are stealth addresses, which sounds really scary, but it's actually just a financial privacy. And we also have decentralized peer-to-peer mixers, which have to be both trustless and blind. If you want to understand what that means, ask me about that in the Q&A or check out my book. Even if we solve all of the issues with the blockchain, we're still going to have to deal with off-chain attacks on financial privacy. So we're talking about side channels, and a side channel in the context of Bitcoin privacy is something that reveals information about the transaction participants that's not on the blockchain. So for instance, when you're using Bitcoin, internet messages are going back and forth. It could be the IP addresses of the people sending these packets. And if we have an attacker that's doing something like logging all internet traffic, and we have an attacker like that, they're called the NSA, and they have the PRISM program and other programs, then that's a huge challenge to financial privacy. The way that we can combat that is by using privacy networks like Tor and I2P and so forth. They help by hiding the geographic origins of internet traffic that's going around. We also need to do a better job of helping people out with operational security, though, and managing their identities on the internet. For example, if you're using Tor and you log into Facebook, and then you check the balance of your Bitcoin address on blockchain.info, someone that's logging all the internet traffic, even though you're using Tor, is going to have a very easy time matching your identity to your Bitcoin address. We also need to do a better job of helping people manage addresses. Earlier I talked about Alice, how she might have these 3 Bitcoin addresses pooled together, and her Bitcoin client's not really asking her if she wants that to happen. It's something that happens behind the scenes. It's kind of too late after the fact. So we need to do a better job of that. There's an effort called Coin Control that should be coming to Bitcoin clients pretty soon that will help out with that. And it's really important that we incorporate all of these technologies directly into Bitcoin clients to make them easy for people, because if they're complicated and hard, then only power users will use them. All right, so conclusions, starting with just the basic financial privacy stuff. Right now, Bitcoin protocol, Bitcoin clients are designed so that only the power users have any kind of decent privacy. The status quo is not very good for the people who are not power users. They don't have good privacy from people that they're doing business with or from people that are data mining the blockchain. And I don't think that status quo is acceptable. The good news is that Bitcoin absolutely can be extended. You have not only financial privacy that's on par with the legacy banking system, but far better than what we had before. A critical component of that is going to be anonymizing Bitcoin addresses and Bitcoin transactions as much as possible. And there's still this open problem that we have to figure out, where if we're not going to change the Bitcoin protocol, how do we protect the privacy of the billions of limited feature phone users that are going to be coming into the Bitcoin ecosystem in the near future? They have these quote-unquote dumb phones that are not necessarily going to be able to connect to the Tor network, not necessarily going to be participating in peer-to-peer decentralized mixing and so forth. So we still need to figure out how we're going to protect those folks. And finally, conclusions for freedom, right? So I think that right now we have an amazing opportunity for achieving better freedom in the world by using Bitcoin. The way that we do that is we help spread Bitcoin even further, and we figure out some of this privacy stuff and improve the anonymity on the Bitcoin network that people can have. And in doing so, we're not going to be just ending the Fed. We're going to be ignoring the Fed or tunneling underneath it, if you prefer. The way that you can help make this happen is you can be a leader as a software user. Let people know that you're demanding privacy features. Let them know that you want to have things like zero coin in the Bitcoin protocol. Let them know that you want to have access to Tor and peer-to-peer mixers in your Bitcoin clients. If you see that there are people that are trying to develop this software in an open source fashion, be willing to crowdfund them, because they need money to make it happen. And finally, if Bitcoin is going to be co-opted in the name of surveillance, you have to be willing to leave Bitcoin for some other altcoin, for Bitcoin 2.0, if it's absolutely necessary. So the good news is that I think there's an incredibly bright future for Bitcoin and for the world in terms of freedom. But it's only one of the possible futures that are out there. So we have to actually go out there and seize it. And I think that these are some of the ways that we make that happen. So thank you very much. I'd love to hear your questions that you may have about this or any related topics.
Thanks, Kristov. Any questions? Just raise your hand. I'll come right to you with the microphone. Got one over here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really passionate about this topic. I'm not a developer, though, and so when you say let people know, who do I need to let know? I see this. I'm also pretty blind about the open source process by which code gets changed and who makes that commit. I don't understand any of that. So.
Right.
Please tell me how that works.
That's a great question. So just to repeat it for anyone that didn't necessarily hear, basically the question is, how can we make these things happen if we're not Bitcoin developers ourselves? So I think that I mean, there's some simple, like, kind of stuff that we can do on the ground to let people know. Send emails out to people that you know that are developers. Send emails to the Bitcoin Foundation if necessary, or let the Bitcoin Foundation know, look, I'd like to donate to your cause, but I need to know, first of all, that you're really pushing these privacy technologies. Let me know what you're doing, and depending on what I hear back from you, I might be willing to send you a donation. So I think that voting with your wallet is a very effective means of making that happen. And not everything is going to be done by the Bitcoin developers, right? So there's a few people that are Bitcoin developers, and they have some internal process for merging all of the changes into the Bitcoin. It's kind of slow, but there's going to be stuff that happens outside of this area. Later on, I think Cody Wilson will be talking about Dark Wallet, which is an interesting project in that area. I'm not really sure what's going to happen with Dark Wallet, but I like the intention there. And there's definitely ways that people can develop software that doesn't necessarily have to be merged directly into the Bitcoin client. And keep in mind, people are using all kinds of Bitcoin clients out there. One of the most popular ones is blockchain.info. And to their credit, they're taking the lead by taking things like CoinJoin and trying to implement it as a decentralized mixing service and making that an option in their wallet. I would actually like to see that become a default or something like that in the future for blockchain.info. So it's not all about the mainstream Bitcoin developers, but there's other ways of putting the pressure on as well. So just sending people who you know that are working on this stuff, let them know, send them an email or whatever, and when you have opportunities to spend money, make sure that people know that it's going to be contingent on whether they're pushing forward these privacy technologies.
Next question.
Actually, I have an answer.
Sure.
Kristov touched on this, but I think the best way to push for privacy features is many of them can be added to the wallets themselves because they're a layer on top of the Bitcoin protocol. So,
right.
So pick a wallet and pressure the wallet makers to add some of these privacy layers that are available. And I think if enough people push for it, I think that'll put the features into the wallet. And then the next step is if there are things that can be done upstream, that can happen too. But there's measures right now that can be put into wallets that people should be pushing for.
Yeah, absolutely. Even just the act of, if there's 20 different wallet providers that you can use, if you pick the one that has the best privacy features, you just did something to help push privacy forward.
Okay, next question up front.
Can you describe more of the Zero Coin, I guess, application?
Sure. So the Zero Coin protocol was proposed a year or two ago, and they've been working on it actively since. It's a project out of Johns Hopkins University led by cryptographer Matthew Green. And the protocol is kind of complicated, but there's a simple explanation that I can kind of give you to give you a high-level overview of how it works. So what they were saying is, we're proposing that we change Bitcoin, and this has kind of been shot down since then, but we change Bitcoin so that if people want to, there's going to be something called a pool of zero coin tokens out there. And if they want to, they can exchange their Bitcoins, they can swap them for zero coin tokens. It doesn't add to the total number of Bitcoins or anything like that. And later on, if they want to, they can swap their zero coin token back for some Bitcoin. But the key thing is that because of the cryptographic properties of it, when you swap it back, you're not getting back the same Bitcoin, and it's very, very, very difficult to figure out exactly what the path was there, going from Bitcoin to zero coin back to Bitcoin. So it's a way of anonymizing Bitcoins, basically. There are some political challenges to making that change to Bitcoin. There are some technical challenges with making it more efficient. And what's going to happen is zero coin is going to be launched as an altcoin, and we're going to see how that fleshes out. And perhaps down the line, if there's enough demand from people, if it can be proven that it's a viable cryptocurrency, then maybe these changes will be kind of pushed back into the mainline Bitcoin cryptocurrency.
More questions?
Can you explain the blind and trustless mixing?
Sure. So this kind of went mainstream in the Bitcoin community with Gregory Maxwell throwing out there this CoinJoin protocol. You may have heard of CoinJoin. So CoinJoin is a way of people, Bitcoin users, getting together on the internet and at the same time and place. Their client software does a little bit of interaction with each other. And what they're able to do is they're mixing each other's coins. They have a bunch of inputs to a single transaction, all of the people that are involved, and a bunch of outputs. And it's very difficult to figure out where the Bitcoins went between the people. And so it's called trustless mixing, because rather than sending your Bitcoins to some third-party service that brings it into their own wallet, and then hopefully they do some kind of mixing, hopefully it doesn't get stolen, hopefully they don't steal your Bitcoins themselves, then you get the Bitcoins out of the mixer at the end. So rather than doing that, it's a peer-to-peer, more decentralized way of doing things. So that's trustless mixing. To make it blind, what we're saying is, not only do the people not know who's mixing whose coins, but if there's a server that's kind of helping to orchestrate this transaction, it doesn't even know whose coins are whose. If you don't make it blind, the server does know that, so it's kind of a weak link in the system. But thanks to some recent cryptographic improvements, we're actually able to make it so that nobody except for the person that's trying to mix the coins actually knows where they're starting out and ending out, which is a fantastic thing, and it's an amazing solution to worrying about if your Bitcoin mixer is going to steal your coins, whether they're going to get hacked or shut down by the FBI, or if they're going to get their records are going to be stolen by the FBI, or if the FBI is running their own mixer. Like what's stopping the FBI from starting their own mixer and letting people use it for a while and then just keeping the logs for themselves? So those are decentralized solutions to the mixing issue for Bitcoin.
More questions? If you want to hang on, I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask a question who hasn't asked a question. Then we can go around a second round. So anyone who has not yet asked a question, don't be shy. I'll come right over to you. You can grab the microphone. All right, round two.
So I want to know how useful, or let's see, how impervious do you think these mixing services are to really sophisticated network analysis? So that I can truly be sure that when I mix my stuff, it'll be mixed and it won't be traceable back to me.
The existing mixing services, they're kind of all over the place. A lot of them are just being run by anonymous people, so we don't really know whether they're competent or not. For the most part, what they're doing is they're doing off-chain accounting. So they get some Bitcoins from a customer, and then completely unrelated to that, they have some existing coins, maybe from another customer or from their existing hot wallet service that they're going to send back to you. And they keep the records of, okay, I got it from Johnny, and then I'm going to send these other coins to Johnny later on. It's not on the blockchain, so it's a way of taking that information, taking off the blockchain, and removing it. But the question is, are they doing this competently? Is it going to be difficult to actually connect the coins that are coming out from the ones that came in? Are they destroying their logs properly? Are they trustworthy? We have to put a lot of trust in the existing centralized Bitcoin mixing services. So what we would prefer to have is a more decentralized solution. In terms of how perfect that mixing is going to be, it's tough to say. The interesting thing about the blockchain is whatever we do right now to obscure our Bitcoin transactions, it's locked in place. It's set in stone on the blockchain for eternity. Meanwhile, people who are trying to figure out what's going on the blockchain, their technology keeps progressing into the future. So what we have to hope is that by the time if they're ever able to figure out where our Bitcoins went, we have to hope that they no longer care about where they went by the time that they have that technological capability. So it's kind of an unknown. And it hasn't been analyzed in a very scientifically rigorous way. What we would prefer to have is mathematical proofs that say, if you do this protocol, then this is the amount of information that someone can possibly get out of this, and just prove it's not possible to do that. Even then, there's going to be what I talked about side channel attacks and all that stuff. So it's complicated, but the good news is that things like zero coin, decentralized mixing, and so forth, they are so far beyond the third-party centralized mixers that are out there right now. Things like Bitcoin Fog, Bitcoin Launder, various tumbling services. It's so much better that I think you can have a fairly high degree of confidence in them. But they're just not totally here yet.
More questions?
Recently, with the scare tactics of money laundering and Bitcoin, from what I understand, that these mixing services just exchange other Bitcoins that are not yours for your Bitcoins and just kind of makes them all a mess. And that seems like the possibility of what if the Bitcoin you got was 2 years ago used in the Silk Road. Though it might not be an actual threat, is there any way to avoid that, or to avoid that kind of possibility?
So if I understand the question correctly, can you avoid having coins that are going to be considered tainted by someone else? If you could avoid it, then you would be able to track it back to whoever the supposed tainted or bad actor was, and it's going to be a difficult task. If you want privacy, then you actually want to make it very difficult to trace back to anything that's tainted. So right now, it's going to be very difficult to do that. I mean, it's such a mess of coins. Organizations like the NSA are almost certainly developing software that allows them to figure out stuff like this, but it's not accessible to us. You can't write to the NSA and say, hey, can you open source your stuff, right? And there isn't any really good open source software for that. So fundamentally, we do have a problem with that, where if people are going to say, oh, these are bad coins, they're evil coins, they're drug money coins and stuff like that, if I get some stuff from Silk Road, I can't help it. There's no way for me to prevent that happening. So if they're going to tell me, well, your coins are worth less or they're no good here in the US, which is why coin validation is such a completely terrible idea, because fundamentally we do not have control over where the coins are coming from originally. They get mined and they go through this incredibly complicated, circuitous path to actually end up at you, unless you're spending coins that you've mined, which is generally not a productive thing for most people to do.
Anyone with a question? No, one back here. All right.
Yeah, on like the question earlier.
Yeah.
I heard about this project called Bit Iodine. I think. I think it's like a PhD student sort of developing Bitcoin blockchain analysis software.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's released open source yet, but
right.
I believe he's willing to like give out code to like academics or.
Sorry, was the and were you're mentioning that you had heard about this, or was there a question?
Yeah. There's a website about it. Just Google like Bit Iodine.
Okay, Bit Iodine.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard of that particular one. There's a number of different efforts. Martin Harrigan, who is a researcher in this area, has quantabytes that he's been working on for a while. I think that will be quite useful. But the problem is that there's no centralized, authoritative way of doing analysis on the blockchain. Everyone has their own methodology for doing it. And so for someone to say, well, I use my methodology and I determined that your coins came from Silk Road, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can come to the same determination independently, because you might be using some other technique for analyzing the network. It's very complicated, and I think that stuff like coin validation is just it's going to be hugely detrimental to Bitcoin for those kind of reasons. Thanks. And that was Bit Iodine is the project.
Yeah. So I think it's more focused on like, let's say I'm running a tumbling service or whatever, and I'm sort of just tumbling my own coins around to my own addresses.
Yep.
I think the capability of Bit Iodine is to like group these addresses that are likely to be associated with each other together. Right. So I think
Right.
I think it's a good source to help people with protecting their privacy, because you're able to use it to analyze your own Bitcoin activity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So something I talk about in the book is once you mix your coins, you need some kind of tool to give you reassurance that it was mixed correctly, right? That's what you're talking about. I gotcha. What we have right now is blockchain.info's taint analysis, which is decent, but I would love to see new ways of measuring that and giving us reassurance that if we're trying to take some precautions to protect our privacy, that we've done an adequate job. So yeah, absolutely, more tools like that are fantastic. Thank you.
Kristov, I have a question.
Yeah.
So there's no concern from your perspective about somebody who, say, has a Bitcoin that has been used at some point in the past on Silk Road, is there? Because, number one, Silk Road does sell legitimate products.
Yes, absolutely.
And secondly, you know, your dollars in your pocket right now, some of them have likely been used in a drug transaction in the past.
Yes.
And nobody is really concerned about that. So
right.
Is there any real liability for somebody having, by chance, something that's been on the Silk Road?
Well, from a moral perspective, absolutely not. I mean, that's a complete, to say that it's a problem for Bitcoin but not a problem for cash, that's a silly double standard to create. From a legal perspective, it depends on where you live and where the lawmakers, how they're going to sort of fall on this issue. Some of them may say, well, you absolutely can't use coins that came out of Silk Road, even though there are legal things being sold there, even though the people may not be actually breaking laws in your country, they might be breaking laws in some other country, or someone sells weed in Amsterdam to another person in Amsterdam over the Silk Road. What laws have they broken? So it's a very complicated thing, and people are saying that, oh, it went through Silk Road, so this is a way of identifying bad actors. I think it's nonsense, and it should be shot down immediately. But how it's going to affect you legally, it really just depends on. We have to wait and see how it shakes out.
But right now, you don't know of any sort of prosecutions or anything like that, right?
Well, the only thing that we do know of is the people who were vendors over Silk Road, where they were making legal, they were selling things legally, not selling drugs or any kind of vice item, but they were selling legal items, T-shirts, posters, stickers, or whatever. They had their money stolen by the FBI, and they're trying to get that money back. But it's tricky for them to prove that the only things that they sold were things that were strictly legal. So there have been some cases where people were doing stuff related to the Silk Road where it was all above board, and they were punished for that.
Very good. Any other questions? Last minute, last opportunity. Did you have one?
Yeah, could you tell us about coin validation? Is it getting any traction?
I haven't heard about it for quite a while now. What my concern is for the coin validation is that they realize that the majority of the Bitcoin community absolutely hates it. And so maybe they've just been working on the background, and they've just been working with legislators and regulators and not talking about it to the community because they're trying to keep it underground as long as possible. I mean, their customers are going to be the government. We're not going to be the customers of that coin validation. We're going to be their product, and we're going to be their victims. So it's possible that's something that's been going on in the background. We just haven't heard about it. We'll have to wait and see. And even if that doesn't happen, other people will try similar stuff. And I think we want to stop it technologically. We want to make it impossible for things like that to happen and erode Bitcoin, rather than waiting to see if someone happens to be successful with their next coin validation plot.
We've got time for maybe one or two more questions. All right. Go back to round 3.
It's kind of a softball, but why should someone buy your book?
Well, the book is all about understanding the issues with Bitcoin privacy. And it tells you exactly how to do the best way to do it anonymously right now, given the tools that we have. If you want to use Bitcoin anonymously right now, there's a lot of guesswork involved. You're going to have to try out a lot of software, a lot of different operating systems, and all that kind of stuff. So I explain to people, here are the issues, so you understand them. Here are all the technical issues presented in, I think, a pretty understandable kind of way. And if you do want to use Bitcoin anonymously right now, follow these guides. I've got screenshots and walkthroughs and all that stuff. So it's nothing is left up to the imagination. It's nothing that you need to experiment with or figure out for your own. So I think it's a time-saving measure and educational for some people. Thanks for asking.
One more question. Anyone else? One more. All right.
Are you going to consider putting on audio, your book?
Audiobook? I haven't thought about it, but if there's a demand for it, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to do that.
For people with bad eyes?
Yeah. All right, cool. Thank you for the feedback.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much. Kristov, I'm sure will be around. If you have any questions for him, feel free to approach him. Lunch is coming up shortly. Got about a 20-minute break. And